We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning to you. This is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, and today we're discussing not only the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, not only the censorship that's following blasphemy accusations of that Lady of Heaven film, but also a geneticist who thinks he's found a way to turn back the biological clock. All that to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Foreign Secretary will address the death sentences given to 2 British men when she speaks to her Ukrainian counterpart later today. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were found guilty of mercenary activities by a court in the pro-Russian region of Donetsk. Liz Truss described the verdict as a sham judgment with no legitimacy and says she'll do everything to support the men. In Ukraine, Aidan's friend and fighter Brennan Phillips told GB News the West needs to close airspace to Russia.
That is what they use to dictate the tempo and of the combat operations on the ground. And the only reason they've been able to make advances, a decisive Ukrainian victory is the best means to securing their release, and will give the UK and the Ukrainian government leverage to negotiate the terms of their release.
A bid to block a deportation flight to Rwanda is being heard in the High Court. Lawyers representing more than 90 people have submitted a legal challenge against the government's policy to send asylum seekers to the African nation. The first flight is due to leave next Tuesday. Lawyers argue the policy is unlawful and are seeking to stop all flights until a full hearing of the case can be heard later in the year. A Foreign Office minister has met with the Brazilian chief of police to discuss the disappearance of a British journalist in the Amazon. That as traces of blood found on a boat belonging to an arrested fisherman are being tested to see whether it's human. Dom Phillips and local Indigenous expert Bruno Araújo Pereira vanished from a remote part of the rainforest earlier this week. MPs have criticised the government's plan to burn £4 billion worth of unusable personal protective equipment. The Public Accounts Committee has accused the Department of Health and Social Care of wasting 75% of the £12 billion it spent on PPE in the first year of the coronavirus pandemic. The PAC urged the government to clarify its plan to dispose of unusable protective equipment, including predicted costs to the Treasury and to the environment. And 14,000 new school places will be created as part of the government's levelling up plans. Up to 75 new free schools and sixth forms will open in 55 areas identified as needing education investment. The first is expected to open in September 2025. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, yesterday the Prime Minister attempted to reset his premiership with a speech in Blackpool, in which he promised to ease the cost of living crisis and to, quote, cut costs in every area of household expenditure. As we touched on yesterday, the Prime Minister pledged a refreshed right-to-buy scheme within housing associations, that is, and there was even talk of a reduction in taxes. He said you can't just spend your way out of inflationary pressure, that the tax burden, as it is an aberration, that sometimes the best way the government can help is to simply get out of the way, to do less, to do it better, or to simply not do it at all. That you can't spend your way out of inflation and you can't tax your way into growth. Well, I have to say, as I listened to him speak, I started to wish this enigmatic economic conservative had been in charge for the last 2 years. If only he had been Prime Minister, perhaps our taxes and inflation would be lower and our growth rate higher. Well, this newfangled rhetoric from the Prime Minister comes, of course, after a tricky week for Boris Johnson, who on Monday just about survived a confidence vote in his leadership, albeit with 40% of his own MPs voting against him. Well, joining me now to reflect on this tumultuous week for the Prime Minister is the political commentator Emma Webb. Welcome to the programme, Emma. I suppose, first of all, it was a promising speech from the Prime Minister yesterday, heavy on rhetoric, although it's been criticised as being light on detail.
Forgive me for being cynical, but it does look as if, as you pointed out, it seems the Prime Minister has suddenly discovered conservatism, and it does appear to be a little bit like, having a naughty husband who's been caught with his, caught red-handed and is now saying, I promise you, darling, I've changed and I'm a changed man and I'm going to do good. I think people around the country are probably not going to believe that this is anything other than rhetoric and cynicism. And Lord Frost has made the point that the Prime Minister really has until October, until party conference season, to prove that he is a changed man and to actually come up with the goods rather than just talking the talk. And I think many people will be looking at this and thinking that if this hasn't materialised so far, the Prime Minister is talking about tax rises as if it isn't this government who has raised tax. And you've made this point yourself, Tom, that by cutting fuel duty, they could ease an enormous burden on households. By removing subsidies in the energy sector, they could make an enormous difference. But they have so far chosen not to do that and have taken very unconservative approaches to economic problems, such as the cost of living crisis. And I think that whilst it, of course, is very promising to hear the Prime Minister talking about cutting tax, I think it's going to take a lot more than that to convince the public that this is a Prime Minister worth keeping, and that actually, you mentioned that this is light on details, but even harking back to the right to buy policy, it suggests that the Conservative Party haven't got a real vision, that they haven't got any new ideas. They're going back to ideas that they know have been successful in the past, in the hope that this will convince the British public not to vote the Conservative Party out of office. But the polling is extremely bad, and the Prime Minister has only just scraped through with a not so much of a confidence vote from his own party. So he really is in hot water, and I'm not entirely convinced that this is going to get him out of trouble.
It's really interesting you raise what Lord Frost said last night, because there's a lot of conventional wisdom in Westminster that the next moment of danger for the Prime Minister is really quite soon. It could well be the 24th of June, the day after those by-elections, although listening to all of the expectation around that, the expectation is the Conservative Party will lose those two by-elections. There are particular local factors in those by-elections, that both MPs who used to represent those seats, Tory MPs resigning in disgrace, no doubt that will influence the vote there. Potentially what Lord Frost is saying there is that the Prime Minister actually has quite a few months to get things in order. And looking at what he was demanding of the Prime Minister, it's quite an attractive list. It's reverse tax increases, commit credibly to future tax cuts, get fracking, remove VAT on energy bills, sunset swathes of EU legislation, eliminate tariffs. It's quite an agenda. Perhaps, if the Prime Minister's survival depends upon delivering it, we might be in for an exciting few months.
If only Lord Frost was in charge, is all I can say. And thank God for Lord Frost, because this is a very welcome ray of sunshine and sense from someone within the Conservative Party. But I think the issue here is that, firstly, you mentioned those by-elections. I think it's very likely that the Conservatives are going to lose Wakefield, and that is going to be a sign that a lot of those former red wall seats will be lost in a general election. That's what the YouGov polling have suggested, that in all but 3 of 88 battleground seats, the Conservatives were likely to lose. And we have seen people like Deanna Davison, of course, who I was very pleased when she won Bishop Auckland, which is a former red wall constituency, first time it ever turned Conservative. And she has come out saying that she didn't have confidence in the Prime Minister. There will be a lot of backbench MPs who are extremely concerned about losing their seats. Wakefield will be a litmus test of that. But I think what will be really interesting is to see what happens in Honiton and Tiverton, because that, of course, is a Conservative safe seat. And if that falls possibly to the Lib Dems or even to Labour, that will be a real sign that actually the flash polling, the snap polling that has taken place over the last couple of days, which has suggested that between in the 40s and in the 50s percent of Conservative Party members have lost confidence in the Prime Minister, that will be a suggestion that actually Boris isn't the winner that maybe the donors and some in the cabinet think that he is. And they will have to have a radical rethink. But of course, the issue is that the 1922 committee rules means that there cannot be another no confidence vote for a year. Of course, they can choose to change those rules, but it may be that come October, come autumn, as Lord Frost said, that they make the decision to change those rules if the Prime Minister hasn't already resigned, because of course there are still Conservative Party MPs and members who are calling for his resignation. And as we've seen with previous no confidence votes with Theresa May, with John Major, usually these things result in a resignation further down the line. Theresa May resigned a year after her no confidence vote. So I think if things don't change substantially and there isn't a clear vision for the Conservative Party coming from the very top, then there will be cause for the rules to be changed so that there can be another no confidence vote.
And just finally, in our last 30 seconds, can the Prime Minister make it through this? He's survived scrapes in the past. He seems to have been given one last chance by his party in that vote on Monday. And I was looking at a focus group up in Wakefield, where a lot of people were very, very irritated by the Conservative Party. But those people who voted Conservative in 2019, who loathed what Boris Johnson has been accused of doing in Downing Street, they're not switching to Labour necessarily. They're staying at home. And it might well be the case in Wakefield that the Labour Party take this seat by default simply because those Tories are staying at home, upset and annoyed with every single politician. Is there, in that sense, a chance that the Tories could win this back? After all, the next general election isn't for 2.5 years.
Well, this is the concern, is that there are many journalists who have been saying, including Alison Pearson, that actually that there are Conservative Party members who are real diehard supporters, had previously supported Boris Johnson, who are now actually saying that the Conservative Party deserves to have a defeat and that actually a Starmer government wouldn't be so bad after all. And so maybe it will just be, as you say, people not turning out to vote and therefore these constituencies falling to the Labour Party. I think this would be a disaster, but there are many people who do hold the view that actually some time to reflect in opposition may be what the Conservative Party need, because they appear to have become weak and flabby and lack a sense of direction. Now, I don't think that that would be an ideal situation, of course, and I don't want the government to be a Labour government or a Starmer government. And there's a question mark over whether the British public would want to see Keir Starmer as the head of the Labour Party being Prime Minister, that actually the Labour Party may need to make some changes too to make itself electable. So I think what we've got is a real muddle. And I'm not optimistic that Boris Johnson is going to be able to survive this, but he has been called the new Teflon Tony, so we will see.
Well, let's have a look at how it all plays out. Of course, next crunch point, possibly the 23rd of June. For now, Emma Webb, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Interesting discussion there. Well, now, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has said that he's very concerned about cancel culture in the UK after screenings of what has been dubbed by some minority groups as a, quote, blasphemous film about the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad were pulled from cinemas. Earlier this week, Cineworld pulled all screenings of The Lady in Heaven in a move they say was designed to ensure the safety of staff and customers. Showcase cinemas have now also reportedly pulled the film. Hundreds of demonstrators began picketing cinemas in Birmingham, Bolton, Bradford and Sheffield, which had been showing the film last weekend. Well, what on earth is going on in our country? Let's talk to Wasiq, who's a counter-terror expert who believes that non-violent Islamism is threatening Western democracies. Welcome to the programme. I suppose, first of all, it seems like we're sort of importing a blasphemy law by proxy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tom. I think we need to put this into context. The vast majority of British Muslims are law-abiding citizens. This cabal of fundamentalists who are using threats of violence to intimidate cinemas across the northwest of England and now even in London are not representative of Muslims in Britain. They are nothing more than a bunch of bullies, and the local authorities and the government must stand up to them. The fact of the matter is, in Britain, we have free speech. We do not have blasphemy laws. So the cancellation of this film by Muslim fundamentalists means that blasphemy laws are being used through the back door, and it is up to the government and the local authorities to shut them out. At present, this doesn't seem to be happening.
Do you believe the cinemas, for example, Cineworld, when they say that they really would like to show this film, but it's simply about the safety of their own staff is why they've had to pull this? It's the genuine threat they feel from the potential of violence.
Well, I do believe them, and they will have taken out their own risk assessment in order to arrive at this position. The fact of the matter is that when you see hundreds of protesters out there calling Shia Muslims a minority sector within Islam, kafir, which means non-believer, this helps to legitimize them being targets, but also the cinema enabling this film, which they find blasphemous and which they find to be insulting the Prophet as a target as well. So of course the cinema are going to feel that they need to take every step that they can to ensure the safety of their staff and their customers, and this is just unacceptable in modern day 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, call me old-fashioned. I just don't quite understand why people wouldn't take the normal view that if you don't like a film, if you think that a film might upset you, if you think that this is something that offends you as an individual, maybe simply don't go and see that film. Is it that hard to suggest that individuals who think they might be personally offended by something should perhaps not see that film themselves, but not prevent others from seeing it if they so wish?
Absolutely, Tom. You've hit the nail on the head there. I think we need to, again, put this into context. There are over 3 million Muslims in this country, and only 100,000 people have signed a petition to ban this movie. That's only around 3% of the Muslim population. So more than half of British Muslims feel like life here is improving in the United Kingdom, according to recent polls. And over 2/3 have noted an increase in participation in society. So if you were to ask me, do these protesters represent British Muslims, I'd go onto the record and say absolutely not.
Yes, it's remarkable that such a tiny minority, only 100,000 people. I've seen petitions put forward to the House of Commons suggesting all sorts of weird and wacky and peculiar things. I'm sure more people believe that Elvis is still alive and man didn't land on the moon than want this film banned. And yet somehow they exercise such power over society. Just finally in this conversation, how do we expose them for the peculiar minority they are, to impress upon cinema change that this is not representative of British or indeed British Muslim opinion, and really stop taking any notice of them?
Well, I think there's two things that we need to do. First of all, we need to provide some of the most vocal proponents of this movie a platform to actually debate them and to give them the free speech that they hate so much, and expose them for the ridiculous position that they have. And the second and the most important thing is that the government have been pretty much silent. I know Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, has made a statement on this, but there's been no official statement that's come from the government, and there hasn't been any pushback either from the local police forces, where we've heard threats of violence, threats of killing being made at these protests. So those are the two things that we need to be doing. We need to provide a platform for the ones who want to speak about this, so we can expose their weak position, and the government need to take a stand against this.
Wise words. Let's hope that the government takes up those suggestions. Waseek, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really interesting conversation to have. Now, moving on to something entirely different. Brian Hanley is a name you probably will not know, but might ought to. He's a geneticist working primarily on HIV therapies, but he's become the subject of a great deal of discussion for something pretty different. 5 years ago, he injected himself with an agent that spurred the production of a specific hormone in his body called GHRH. He then electrocuted himself. It sounds like something out of science fiction, but early results seem to suggest that this relatively simple procedure may have turned back his biological clock by 6 years. He may have made himself younger. Well, have Hanley's experiments been successful, and what does it mean for the rest of us? I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Arya Babu, a researcher at the think tank The Entrepreneurs Network. Welcome to the programme. Have we cracked ageing? Is this something that is really incredibly significant?
Yes, if this is the solution to ageing, then this is probably one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs, maybe ever. Obviously, you can't be sure that this is the solution. This is a trial on one person who has a lot of reason to really want this to be the case. But I think this is definitely good evidence to say that we should be looking into GHRH and other similar products to see if that really is a way of turning back the biological clock.
If we take this conversation back to first principles, what is the biological clock? What is the sense of sort of ageing, and why is it an issue? Why should we be wanting to experiment in this field?
So, the question of what the biological clock is a massive area of debate amongst biologists and people who are working in the ageing field. There are lots of things that correlate with ageing. So as you get older, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure gets worse, you find it harder to heal from like simple wounds, your lipid profile is worse, your cholesterol goes up. There are all kinds of things. So people can measure lots of these different factors, and then when you put them together, it looks like you're genetically or biologically older or genetically and biologically younger. So Brian Hanley's experiments have boosted his testosterone, his vision's gotten better, his arthritis is cured, all kinds of normal things that you would associate with being older are now not the case for him.
So when people talk about the idea that we might want to live for longer as a species, a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to live longer, I'll be frail, I'll be ill. It doesn't sound like, I mean, if you have a low quality of life, that's not something that's particularly attractive. But if we're able to have someone living, for example, in a state like them being in their 20s or 30s for longer, that could be a huge societal development.
That's ideal, and I would say it's probably more important than pushing our lifespans further as well. I think a lot of people end up with illnesses like diabetes and cholesterol problems that mean that they have a very long and protracted sort of elderly period from the age of like 70 to 80. But lots of people who are very long-lived end up very, very healthy until they're like late 90s, and then suddenly something gets them. I think that's a much preferable state to be. Obviously, it'd be wonderful if actually you end up with a very healthy period that goes on until you're 200 or so. But being very healthy until you're 90 and then suddenly being taken out is much more preferable to how most people are dying.
So potentially this research is as much about making the lifespans that we have much more healthy, much more productive, much more better lived than actually doubling the length that we live.
Precisely. So Brian, at the end of his main paper, says it is highly likely that all he has done is increase his health span, not his lifespan, but he's still very, very happy with that outcome.
So that's so incredible. Do we know if there are any larger scale research projects to do with this? Is there any state funding going into this? What's going on in the wider field of ageing and research?
There is not, and this is where it's quite frustrating. It's very difficult to get approval for the clinical trials that are going to target ageing specifically, because hardly any medical regulators recognise ageing itself as a disease worth curing. So you can do an Alzheimer's trial, or you can do an arthritis trial, or all kinds of stuff like that. But Japan is really the only country that has acknowledged that ageing is a disease that ought to have clinical trials in order to try.
That's quite politically contentious to suggest that ageing is a disease, because lots of people will feel they are ageing gracefully, that it's something that everyone goes through, that it's not necessarily something that's wrong with people. Might there be a better way to describe it to unlock funding?
True, yeah. Ageing as a disease is a way of framing it in terms of how medical regulators think. Obviously, we're quite used to receiving healthcare for normal parts of being a human. Like, every pregnant woman is not saying pregnancy is a disease, but she's also going to her doctor for treatment and like consultation on that. Ageing as a disease is a way of putting it within medical regulators' frameworks of looking at clinical trials and that kind of thing. We don't need to intellectually or conversationally frame it as that.
So in our final 30 seconds, what needs to be done now? Who do we need to lobby? Who do we need to speak to? And when can I get this injection to make me stay in my 20s forever?
I think a really simple change that we could have is we could have NICE, which is the UK's main medicines purchaser for the NHS, say that they, using their already existing quality of life adjusted metrics, would purchase anti-aging drugs or therapies on a particular cost basis if they wanted that. But there's also loads we can do in terms of just injecting funding into 50 or 60 different projects that look like they could be promising. And that's a role for Innovate UK or the New Research Agency or, you know, UK DARPA and that sort of thing.
Yeah, these sort of throw money at various different things and hope that one might work out. Well, Arya Babu, it's been so good to talk to you on this subject. It's something really important, and I'm glad we found time for it in the programme. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for the briefing this morning. I'm actually back for a double bill of the briefing from 12 until 2, so stick around for that. That's after To The Point with Patrick Christie's, which is after itself, the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A bright start for many of us, but a breezy start, and that wind will pick up further during the rest of the day with showers developing. Those showers will be frequent and heavy for Scotland and Northern Ireland near this low pressure. This is an unusually deep area of low pressure for the time of year. We don't often see this sort of thing in early June, so unseasonably strong winds expected during the rest of the day and into tomorrow. Also, a few showers around first thing. East Anglia, southern England sees 1 or 2, but the most frequent showers will develop across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Heavy at times with hail and thunder in places, and that strengthening wind. A breezy day for many of us, but the wind strongest across exposed coasts of western Scotland, reaching gale force here, 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Feeling cool where that wind is at its strongest, but further south and east, a reasonably warm day, still the potential for low 20s, even 24 Celsius in London, and staying mostly dry with sunny spells here. Clearing skies in the south and the east overnight. Further showers perhaps for parts of Wales and Western England, but again, the most frequent showers or more prolonged rain for parts of Scotland, especially towards the northwest. And again, a blustery night to come. But of course, that will keep the temperatures up, so a relatively mild start to the weekend. And again, another bright start for central and eastern parts of the country. Quite quickly, the cloud will build and we'll see further showers developing. I think more showers to come across Wales, central and northern England compared to Friday. And a stronger breeze, that breeze bouncing over the hills of Wales and northern England. But the strongest winds, the most frequent showers, will again affect Scotland and Northern Ireland. And it will feel a bit cooler as a result. Sunday looks a little less windy, a little less showery, but still some blustery showers around, sunshine in between them. Monday, on the whole, looks like an improvement with, for many, a drier and calmer day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp